What's up everyone? I'm Twisted. The new comic titled The Warning is now live and I really want to cover it, but since I didn't get to cover the previous one we got, I thought hey, why not cover both in the same video? So here we are, we'll be taking a look at both the truth and The Warning, the last two comics that came out. Make sure you watch this video until the end because we'll be discussing where this year's story might be leading to, and spoilers, it might include the Targonian aspects. So, the truth starts right after the ending of the Battle of Koshin. There, the wards of the Temple of Twilight were breached, someone managed to invade the temple, while Shen and Yunara fought the demons. Then Shen had a nightmarish vision, the one we saw in the beginning of the end cinematic. In the truth, we see him recovering from that vision. Shen asks what enemy can reach inside his mind to give him nightmares. Here both Kennen and Yunara assume this must be the work of a Darkin, as they have the power to reach inside the minds of mortals, usually to lure them to wield their weapons. However, as we saw in the cinematic, this vision is actually LeBlanc's doing, but for now neither Kennen nor Yunara know that. So they start talking to Shen about the Darkin. Kennen asks him what he knows about them, and Shen tells him that they were beasts from the world before. This term could refer to the world before the Rune Wars, but it can also simply mean from a long time ago. He says the Winged Protectors defeated one, and we see the events of the Still Here cinematic, where Kael and Morgana fought Aatrox. But notice how only Kael is depicted here, perhaps a reference to how Demacia remembers Kael more than Morgana. Kennen then references the tale of the devoted Shrine Maiden. This is the myth we saw in the previous comic. At the time we already knew that not everything in this tale was true. It was, after all, just a myth, with the whole comic even taking place inside the scroll. But now we're about to see how much of this myth was actually true, hence the name of the comic, The Truth. The comic takes us back 15 centuries, considering that the Darkin War took place in the year 550 before Noxus, and that Shen's story should take place around the year 989, this is mostly correct. From now on, I will be referring to the time of Shen's story as the present. I believe this should be the Kinku Temple of Koshin, the place where Kennen takes Shen in the Pilgrimage comic. Not to be confused with the Temple of Twilight, the temple that was transported to the Spirit Realm and only recently returned. At some point the Kinku left this place, and in the present it is in ruins. It's possible that the Kinku left after the Darkin Wars were over and are only now in the present returning to this area. A Darkin is invading Ionia, and right off the gate we see our first discrepancy between myth and truth. In the myth, the Darkin were first benevolent and kind to the Ionians, while here we see that was not the case. It's hard to say which Darkin this is, but I believe this is Pra. The design very loosely matches the spirit we see in the myth. Notice the headpiece and 4 arms. And since this spirit is wielding bladed fans, I assumed it was Pra. It also makes sense for both of these to be the same being, since they are both the first we see in each version of the story. Pra is also one of the few Darkin tied to Ionia, and she's mentioned in Yunara's bio. So for now I have no reason to believe this is not her. Besides maybe the weapon she has here, it does look more like a sword. Yunara says some of the Ionians pray to the shrine spirits for deliverance, and that's when Zaahen arrived. This parallels the moment in the myth where Yunara prayed to the shrine of the temple for help. Yunara refers to Shurima here as the Third Lands. Since the First Lands is the name of the Ionian archipelago during this time period, one could assume that the Third Lands refers to the Shuriman continent and that the Second Lands could refer to Valorant, for example. However, Yunara will later say that Shen's steel also comes from the Third Lands, leading me to believe this term is used for all locations outside of Ionia. If this is true, then the term Second Lands likely refers to the Spirit Realm, assuming that's also a term that exists. Zaahen defeats an entire army and saves the Ionians. Here and in the previous panel, we can spot some red stripes on his glaive. We don't know what these represent for now, but they are still present in the glaive in the present, even after it merged with Atakan. Zaahen explains the Ascended and Darkin to the Kinku, and says that he stands against his kin in their war to conquer the world. He then shows the Kinku a scroll with a drawing of the Chalikar. For those that don't know, according to the story Twilight of the Gods, Sivir's weapon, the Chalikar, has the power to channel the magic of the moon and take the Ascended's power from their bodies, allowing them to be killed or sealed inside their own weapons. This weapon was given to mortals by Maisha, the former aspect of Twilight, her intention being to rid the world of the Darkin and potentially all of other Ascended as well. It's unknown why Zaahen, an Ascended, knows about this, but as we'll see, the aspect of Twilight will also play a role in this story, so it's possible that Zaahen aligned himself with them at some point. Yunara mentions that he already slain some of his brothers and sisters, seemingly without the use of the Chalikar, which is not impossible, but does make me question why then show this scroll with the weapon. We'll come back to this in a second. Here we get a better look at the Kinku members. We have Yunara, the Fist of Shadow. In modern times this title belongs to Akali's mother. An unknown figure as the Eye of Twilight, title that now belongs to Shen. We can even spot the spirit blade on their back. Note that this doesn't mean this person is an ancestor of Shen. Eye of Twilight is just a title, the same way Yunara is not necessarily an ancestor of Akali. Also we know from Yunara's bio that this person is named Binan. And then we have Kennen, the Heart of the Tempest, the first and only Kinku member to have this title. Also Zaahen has a tail here. This is one of the very few panels where he has one. The Eye of Twilight agrees to let Zaahen help them, and in the next page we see the Kinku fighting the Darkin. I especially like the design of the Eye of Twilight here. She was also wearing this helmet in the first panel we saw her. Also the sword's design is wrong here for some reason. Yeah, this comic has a couple minor visual inconsistencies. In the back we can spot Zaahen fighting who I believe is Rust. Now I know the design of the weapon might not resemble a scythe here, but I think that's just because of the perspective. The face of the Darkin does loosely match the face of Rust in the myth, and the weapon does have these fin-like blades like the scythe of Rust, as well as the edge below on the handle. Funny enough, Rust's face here looks surprisingly similar to Kane's. And this makes me wonder, why does he decide to get horns when he defeats Kane? Is it just to look cool and edgy? Anyways, next we see Zaahen sealing Varus in the Elysian cage. His face here being a bit more twisted than what we saw in the myth. These purple hands we see dragging him down are a reference to the music video As We Fall, where we see them holding onto Valmar and Kai. Now some of you might be really confused, because despite being hidden in Ionia, Varus was not defeated there. Or was he? His bio used to say that at some point, a golden armored warrior queen of Valoran sealed him in his weapon and wielded his bow during the war, eventually bringing him to Ionia to hide him there. But his bio was recently updated and this part of his lore is now referenced as a legend, something that might or not have happened. And well, based on this comic, we know it didn't. This is definitely a way to retcon something, huh? I'm not too mad because this lore was never really explored anyway. It was a breadcrumb left here to be potentially followed up in the future, but now that will likely never happen and this feels really out of place here. We then see Zolani, another Darkin hidden in Ionia in modern times. We can spot her blood letters. Like Varus and Rust, this is the first time we see her in her original Darkin form. And actually, this is technically the first canon design she has, as previously we've only ever seen her in the Darkin saga, which is mostly a what-if future. And finally we see Zaahen lifting Rust's scythe, and we know he's now sealed inside it because of the eye on the weapon. As far as we know, he was hidden in Noxus, so it's curious to see that he was sealed in Ionia. I wonder if he was still later moved to Noxus, or if that part of his lore will be retconned. Rust being in Ionia so early in the timeline is definitely something that wasn't planned, as he even has a quote asking Kane if all Ionians are as confident as him. A weird thing to ask if he already had armies of them centuries ago. Yunara says they were able to bind some of the Darkin into their weapons. My question is why? If Zaahen himself can kill his own kind, what's the point of sealing them into weapons? In Twilight of the Gods, Maisha says that sealing them into their weapons is a different approach they need to take as opposed to just killing them. But we never learn why this was the case. One could assume that she wanted to seal some Darkin so that their weapons could be wielded against their brothers, but this is just speculation and not something we ever see happening, including here in this comic. Again, if killing the Darkin is a possibility and Zaahen has done it in the past, why are the Darkin in this comic sealed in their weapons instead? Also, how are they being sealed anyway? Am I missing something? Shouldn't the Chalikar be required for this to happen? Moving on, Yunara says that as the Fist of Shadow, it's her duty to kill Zaahen if he ever betrayed them. See? Kill, not seal. We then cut to the hidden Kinku temple of Twilight. Binan allowed Zaahen to live in peace, but instead he chose to be bound to his weapon, fearing he too might become evil like his brothers. Again, not sure why he didn't just ask to die here. Even if keeping the Darkin sealed in their weapons is part of some kind of scheme from the aspects, there's not much reason for Zaahen to follow that, as he seems generally concerned about protecting the world from his kin. I believe this tree is actually the one we see in the cinematic, the one where the glaive was hidden. The temple was then cast into the spirit realm to hide Zaahen's weapon. This part is actually pretty close to the myth, except there Yunara didn't know at first that Zaahen was one of the Darkin, there's no mention of sealing them into weapons, and Yunara herself chose to join Zaahen into exile, while in reality the reason she also went to the spirit realm was to stand guard over the temple and the Darkin Glaive. In general, the myth romanticizes the war and Yunara's relationship with Zaahen. It depicts her as a devoted shrine maiden, aided by a shrine spirit to save save Ionia, when the truth is that Yunara was a member of the Kinku, and it was thanks to a Shuriman Ascendant that they were able to defeat the Darkin. But why? Why is the myth so inaccurate? Well, Shen wonders the same, and Kennen answers by explaining that to recover from the war, it was better to let Ionians remember a wholesome fable instead of a painful truth. Here I wanna note how well written everything was. Every piece of lore we got after the release of the myth, for example Yunara's bio or her voice lines, did not contradict the myth itself. Everything was written in such a way to never mention the parts of the myth that were not accurate. So, until the release of this comic, we had no way of knowing for certain which parts were real and which ones were not. Yunara says that the demon she fought with Shen were a distraction to lure her away from Zaahen. This is something we already knew, we even see Atakan racing to the temple during the Battle of Koshin. Now, how did LeBlanc manage to summon all of these demons? Don't worry about it. Anyways, Shen recognizes the Darkin as a threat to everyone and decides to help instead of returning to Demacia. The trio arrives at the Kinku temple where a member of the order asks about Shen. Apparently he is still far away, and neither him nor Akali's mother can reach Koshin in time. Damn, if only Shen could teleport, am I right? Obviously this is just an excuse to keep the story focused on Yunara and Shen. The Temple of Twilight has returned to the Spirit Realm. There the temple itself is protected by the Trials of Twilight. To enter the temple, Shen and Yunara will have to pass these trials. I believe the writers of the comic specifically mentioned that this defense system only exists when the temple is in the Spirit Realm to justify why Atakan was able to get inside. The demon entered when the temple was in the Mortal Realm. It's very possible that LeBlanc herself also knew about these trials, and that she somehow played a role in temporarily bringing the temple back to the Mortal Realm. Yunara says the temple itself will test them, to see if their spirits are strong and their intentions honorable. Here we get the origin of the most recent Shen skin. Don't worry about the magic in his arm, it's just here for aura farming reasons. Yunara also says Shen still will dull the magic around him, justifying why he needs to get a new skin. And like I mentioned before, she refers to Demacia as being in the third lens. Shen's Spirit Blossom tree returns. The last time we saw it, it was in the first comic of the second season. We saw Shen planting the tree in the mountain. Now the tree will be used to forge him a new handle for his spear, which was broken at the end of the Battle of Koshin. Demacian roots in Ionian soil, the exact opposite of Shen Zhao. The tree was born in Demacia and brought to Ionia, while Shen was born in Ionia and now lives in Demacia. And if it's true that the tree was part of LeBlanc's plan to bring Shen to Ionia, then both the fate of the tree and Shen were tempered by Noxian hands. Kennen starts channeling magic, and we see spirits like the ones from Yunara's weapon. We get this line from Kennen, which according to Yunara's quote, should be some kind of blessing. And finally the heroes enter the portal to begin the trials. Speaking of which, the comic ends with Shen back in the Visceral, the ship where he was first attacked by Noxians when he was just a child. And then we see Boyang, a brand new character. And this leads us right into the new comic, The Warning. Shen and Boyang fight, though Shen does not know why. We learn that they were like brothers, and that they even met on that ship. I feel like it's a bit late in the story to introduce a character like this, but as we'll see, Boyang represents Shen's life before Demacia. Everything he had to do and sacrifice. Deep down, there is something you know you have yet to face. There's a part of his past that he runs away from. We see Shen's first kill, a Noxian he killed with a mop stick to protect his crew. Boyang says that Shen killing this Noxian was the reason the whole crew died, but as he says this, a golden crack appears on his body, and as we'll see, this magic is likely tied to LeBlanc. Boyang says he followed Shen until the very end, all the way to Kalstead, this being the place where the Demacians defeated Shen and his fellow Noxian soldiers. The aftermath of the battle is described in Shen's story. It's here where he decides to stay with the Demacians. We learn that Shen's friend died in this battle. He asks Shen if all the lives he took were worth it, if he did make the world a better place, or if more good could have been done by choosing not to fight at all. This dilemma is a core part of the narrative of the Kinku, and in fact of the narrative of Ionia as a whole. Their traditions encourage them to be pacifists, but when war knocks at their door, what would be worse, to act or to stand still? The story of almost every single Ionian champion revolves around this, the consequences of their actions and inactions. So it makes sense why the temple is testing Shen with these lines. We then transition to Demacia, supposedly to the moment King Jarvan sent Shen to Ionia. The king says that Shen has been questioning the gardeners about the wildwoods. I wonder if this is a reference to the magical forests around Demacia, because fun fact, these are said to be as magical as those in Ionia. The king is very unkind to Shen, being annoyed with him and wanting to send him away to Ionia, but Shen mentions that this was not how it happened. And it's then that a Darkin-controlled Garen appears and slays the king. Shen rushes in, impaling his spear on his throat. Then a Darkin-controlled Jarvan appears, telling Shen that he has failed. From the cinematic we know that these visions are LeBlanc's doing, meaning that she somehow found a way to corrupt the trials of Twilight to twist them into a nightmare for Shen. But why is she doing this? Well, if we continue the comic, we see the Darkin taunting Shen, telling him he failed to protect Jarvan and that he should have returned to Demacia when Yunara told him to. LeBlanc's face flashes on top of Jarvan's, showing us that she's behind all of this. The Darkin says Shen is not strong enough to defy the god warriors of Shurima, and the next panel focuses on Garen's sword. It's obvious what's going through Shen's mind. The blade blinks, revealing LeBlanc's reflection in its eye, another reminder that she's the source of these visions. And this is what she wants. She wants Shen to feel like he is not strong enough, that he must wield the Darkin weapon in order to be powerful enough to stop them. For the longest time we've known that LeBlanc had a host for the Darkin Glaive, a host that she lost. And we have been speculating that Shen was the replacement, that LeBlanc was behind him returning to Ionia. And like I said in my video about the cinematic, I believe she's giving these visions to Shen to make him wield the Glaive. And so far this comic seems to support that idea. Shen concludes that wielding the weapon is the answer, the way he'll be able to defeat the Darkin. But a new voice chimes in, Zaahen himself. He warns Shen that grabbing a Darkin weapon is not the answer he seeks, hence why the name of the comic, The Warning. Also, this is not the debut of Zaahen's voice, that was actually in the Devoted Shrine Maiden.
I have deceived you, my friend. That is not the answer you seek.
Shen comes back to his senses as Yunara calls to him. Behind them we can spot this mural. This was also seen in the promo art of the previous comic. And strap in because we got a lot to talk about here. First we can spot Kennen and Yunara. So this up here must be Binan, the Eye of Twilight from the past. The design loosely matches them with their mask on, but notice the eye on their body. Yes, they are called the Eye of Twilight, so having an eye motif is not surprising. What's surprising is how much this resembles the crest of the Black Rose. But how is this possible when the Darkin Wars took place centuries before LeBlanc even began serving Mordekaiser? We can only speculate, but maybe the rose's crest has an origin outside of the rose itself, either predating it or being based on something that predates it. Maybe the Eye of Twilight / the Kinku and the Black Rose have some common origin, something else that eventually led to the creation of both. For now though, it's impossible to say for sure. At the bottom we can spot this being. This part looks exactly like the headpiece from Zoe's new Prestige skin, and this around it is the piece on her neck. So far, all of the Prestige skins have been tied to the lore of this year. Zoe's skin is based on the aspect of Twilight, who was behind the Darkin's defeat. So it's not that weird to see it here in this context. Perhaps this is hinting that Zaahen was indeed working with Maisha. And before someone says it, I don't think the skin itself represents Maisha. According to the Twilight of the Gods, she should look like a normal girl, with blue and purple eyes. This skin is more akin to the warrior from Legends of Runeterra, as in the actual physical manifestation of the aspect of Twilight. If this is Twilight, then perhaps these are the sun and the moon. They have been mentioned in this season, as well as the tribes that worship them in Targon. Not to mention how the power of the Ascended comes from the sun, and it was the power of the moon that allowed mortals to seal them in their weapons. The symbol in the center could represent Ionia, but I'm not 100% sure. And connecting everything is this tree in the background, likely the same one we saw in the cinematic, the one where Zaahen's glaive is hidden. I wonder if we're getting some kind of connection between the Kinku and Targon. We know that this temple was where the Kinku had watched the stars for millennia, which could have been a hint to this connection. Though I should mention that this is part of Kinku's philosophies. In specific, this is the duty of the Eye of Twilight. This is not new lore, but these new stories could be tying this duty to the aspect somehow. But this is all just speculation. I have a feeling there's more to this mural. Like, why exactly is the aspect of Twilight here? We just don't have all the pieces to figure it out. But with it being in the background of this promo and now here, I know for sure it's important. Continuing with the comic, Yunara says that it should not be possible for Zaahen to influence the trials, but as we saw, if LeBlanc found a way to twist them into nightmares, then Zaahen as well must have found a way to send a warning to the heroes. Yunara says Zaahen still fears that he might destroy the world, the reason he was sealed. The comic ends with Shen questioning Yunara if Zaahen is still loyal to his promise to the Kinku or if he has finally turned evil and is now luring others to free him from the spirit realm. The lore of the last 2 seasons has been coming out so slowly that sometimes I forget that Shen and Yunara still know nothing about LeBlanc. Like they have no idea she's behind all of this. That's why they fear Zaahen's intentions. Anyways, Yunara believes there's still some good left in him, and so Shen trusts her and says they will not abandon him. It's hard to notice, but they actually broke the mural. This circular hole here is where the mural was. And off they go. Don't worry guys, they are going to face LeBlanc and Atakan anytime now. Jokes aside, that's it from both comics. I'm really enjoying the comics we got this year. They're probably the best part of the seasons. And the fact that they are getting longer and are now fully voice acted is great. For this season, as I teased, we'll see Yunara and Shen facing Atakan and LeBlanc. And of course, it's more than obvious that Zaahen is returning somehow after being sealed in his weapon. As I said before, if LeBlanc does plan to use Shen as a host, I don't think her plan will work out. Though regardless of the outcome, if this is LeBlanc's intention, I would love to know what's special about Shen. I'm also very curious to see how the aspect of Twilight will fit in this story, if at all, especially considering that there might be more aspect skins coming according to the files. We still don't know exactly how the Noxii were tied to the Targonians, nor how Atakan knew about Zaahen, and perhaps we won't know in this season. These questions could be left for next year, in a Targonian season perhaps? That would be cool. Anyways, thanks for watching this far. Let me know if I missed anything. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, it's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next video.